If you've ever competed in jiu-jitsu, you know that it can be either a massive rush of endorphins where you finally realize your potential, hit the middle of the podium and submit all your opponents, or something that cripples you when you get subdued by anxiety, you completely shit the bed, you use techniques you don't usually use, and you get beaten by somebody that you shouldn't get beaten by. And the reason this happens is it comes down to how you focus in your preparation and on the day. So today in this video, what I'm going to be showing you is the systems that I've implemented with myself and my students that have enabled them to win their first gold medals, snap losing streaks, win major and world titles, all while feeling like champions the entire time amidst circumstances that should have prevented them from feeling that way, which I'm sure you've experienced. To start, the reason why most people feel anxious around competition in the lead up to it is because of their preparation. Sometimes we feel that preparation has to be perfect in order for us to compete to the best of our abilities, and that just simply isn't true. You've heard hundreds of stories of high-level athletes going into competitions sick or injured, or they've had the death of a family member, and they still compete to the best of their ability. So it can't be perfect preparation that makes perfect competition. You've got stories like Michael Jordan with the flu game. You've got Buster Douglas when his mum died and he told her before she died he was going to beat Mike Tyson. He ends up getting knocked down in the third or fourth round or whatever it was. He ends up coming back to beat Mike Tyson. And at the time, Mike Tyson was the king of heavyweight boxing. Nobody believed that Buster Douglas was going to beat him, and yet he still did. Why did that happen? Well, it's the same reason that when Lindsay was talking to me about her aspirational goals for the back end of last year of winning a world title, winning a Pan Am's title, and winning a super fight, but that all of that got slightly derailed because she re-injured her LCL. And if you've ever injured an LCL, you know exactly how devastating that can be for jiu-jitsu, because you use your knees in every single move in jiu-jitsu, and having that thought in the back of your head where you're injured is going to stop you from feeling confident in all of your techniques. It's going to derail all of your preparation. It's going to prevent you from moving in specific ways. It's going to make you more hesitant when you're training and therefore when you're competing. So how do you get over this? Sometimes this cripples people, and sometimes it doesn't make a difference about how they compete. So the best way to combat this anxiousness around your preparation is only focus on what you can control. And the way that I get my students to do this, and the way that I actually do this as well, is you draw two circles on a piece of paper, just like this. I'm going to draw them small, just for the economy of the page here, but you get the idea. So in the first circle, what you're going to do is put everything you can control. It's going to be things like committing to your training schedule, what you're putting in your mouth, the recovery that you're doing, the sleep that you get, the study that you do, the things that you directly have control over that aren't going to be associated to anybody else or any other circumstances. And that's really important to remember, because it's going to give you the power to focus on the things that are actually going to drive results, instead of getting anxious about the things that you can do nothing about, which is only going to drive anxiety and nerves and stress and worry, which is going to make you a hesitant and stale and rigid competitor. In the second circle, around the outside of what you can control, you're going to put all the things you can't control. Things like the referee, the competitors that you're going to be facing, the way that the bracket falls, the weather on the day of competing, like that's going to make a difference. But some people genuinely consider that if it's raining, they're going to compete shit. If it's sunny, they're going to compete well. And through this process, you kind of realize how stupid all of that is. And hopefully it starts to break the mold of that and give you a different perspective on what you could be best putting your energy towards, therefore competing at a much higher level instead of competing under how you train, which is a common thing for most people. You're going to put things in there like what their coach is teaching them, what they're learning, how they're studying, if they're injured or not, because really, to be fair, it's actually none of your business, because you can't do anything about it. So then why are you focusing on it? Why are you putting your energy towards it? Why are you just riling yourself up and making yourself a nervous wreck for nothing, really? And this goes back to what you can control about yourself. So once you remove those limiters of the things you can't control, you go directly into focusing on what you can control. And that also excludes outcomes like winning and losing. It also excludes whether you're going to rock up sick or not. I've had many fights in my career where I rocked up and I had a shit night's sleep and I had a 1% recovery when I was wearing Whoop at the time, and all that stuff would have driven most people crazy, except I just went, there's nothing I can do about it. The only thing I can do is focus on what I can control, how I'm going to start the match, what I'm going to do in the match, the way that I'm going to prepare, whether I make myself a nervous wreck or not at the moment, whether I calm myself down, whether I go through my normal warm-up as if everything's completely okay. And you'd be very surprised at how effective this can be at just lowering that level of nervousness and forcing you to focus on things that are actually going to drive good performance. Which leads me into the second biggest problem, which happens on the day for most people, and that is going to be paralysis by analysis. This is the most common trait of people who compete far worse than they train. When they go to training, they feel smooth and fluid, and they develop skills in a very seamless and systemized manner because they've got an intention for their training, they've got a plan that they're executing, they know what they need to do, they know when they need to do it, and everything just flows nicely and neatly. But when they think about competition, they're thinking about all the possible things that could go wrong and all the possible scenarios that they're going to have to face, which is only in your imagination. Truth be told, you don't actually know what you're going to come up against when you compete. You have no idea whether your opponent's going to jump close guard at you or throw a flying triangle at you or throw a flying armbar at you. You have no idea whether they're going to be a proficient wrestler and haven't put anything on their smooth comp profile where they've been wrestling for 10 years and they're a white belt. You just don't know. The two biggest drivers of paralysis by analysis is trying to figure out every single scenario that's going to happen and trying to figure out every single match that's going to happen on the day. So the two biggest fixes for that, the only thing you're going to focus on around the match that you can prepare for, that you actually have control over, is how you will start. It's as simple as that. Am I going to pull guard or am I going to wrestle? That's literally it. That's what I want you focused on. That's what I teach all of my students. That's what I teach myself. It's like this. You know when you're about to have a tough conversation with somebody and you theorize all the things that they're going to say back to you, and then you counter that with another response, and then they say something else in your imagination, and then you counter that with another response. You just end up getting anxious and frustrated at the conversation that you're literally sitting there in your car like a fucking maniac talking to yourself. And then you have the conversation and it goes in a completely different direction that you didn't even anticipate, and it goes really smoothly. Well, jiu-jitsu is the same thing. You're thinking about all these dire situations that could happen, like what if I get into an armbar, or what if I get pinned, or what if I get stuck under side control, and blah, 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 blah. First of all, your training should be accommodating for that anyway. You should be training in bad positions. You should be training in late stage submission escapes in a safe environment, in a low stakes environment, so that you get used to what that feels like. And then when you enter that stage in competition, it's just water off a duck's back. You've been there before, you know exactly what it looks like. But the easiest way that I've found coaching hundreds of students in competition to negate all of this is just focus on how you're going to start. Pull guard or wrestle, if you want to play bottom or if you want to play top. They're the only things you should be focused on because they're the easiest to facilitate and they're not going to drive up anxiety. The second point to this is do not look at your bracket. If you're in a very high level super fight tournament where there's professionals and there's a lot of videotape on them, doing a little bit of study about your opponent's best moves and the things you should be worried about is probably a good idea. But if you're at a lower level tournament and you're trying to just find these people's Instagrams and look at their highlights and look at what country flag they have, hoping it's not Russian or anything like that, all you're doing is just making your mind a mess for the competition the day after. There's not going to be anything that you get that's going to be a gain out of that, because let's be honest, smooth comp profiles don't tell you anything about the opponent except their win rate, their submission rate, how many walkovers they have, so on and so forth. But you don't know who they beat. They could have beat absolute tomato cans and submitted them, but you have no idea that they were a day 50 white belt or something like that. And now you're nervous because this guy has an 80% submission rate, But it's just been in his hometown where it didn't matter and none of those guys had any business competing anyway. Maybe it was their first time competing or something of that nature. The second thing that drives up anxiety is when you go onto Instagram and you watch all their highlights, but you forget that they're only posting their highlights. They're not posting their losses. They're not posting when they get pinned under Kezigatami. They're not posting any of that stuff. So you're never going to see the weaknesses that you're trying to look for because no one's going to be posting that on Instagram. So you're going to falsely assume that these people are superheroes. You're going to lower your self-concept in comparison to them. And then you're not going to compete to the best of your ability because you're going to think you're outgunned from the beginning. But this is all fake. This is all fugazi. This is all... I love that movie. Wolf of Wall Street, by the way. It all doesn't matter because it's, again, going back to the first point, it's all things you can't control. It's got nothing to do with you and the things that you have available to you to compete to the best of your ability. And all you're doing is taking away your power and taking away your focus on the things that you could actually be doing to make yourself better. And the point that not a lot of people realize when considering this is that your opponents are probably doing these things as well. So let them do it, let them get anxious, let them get in a rut mentally while you rock up, calm as a cucumber, very composed, doing your warm-up process, which we're going to go into next, focused on the right things, focused on where you can control, and not driving yourself into an anxious puddle so that you can outcompete them without even starting the match. You're already ahead by doing these things. So if you want to be the person that has those attributes when you compete, don't get stuck in paralysis by analysis. It's an absolute trap. The third biggest thing that ruins competitions for athletes of all different varieties is that competing is a roller coaster of a day. What do I mean by that? When I competed at ADCC in 2024, I had my first match against Mike Perez, which I won via a back take. I narrowly missed out on submitting him because he was very defensively sound and his arms are quite little, so I couldn't grab onto them with enough time to be able to submit him before the end of the match. The second match, I ended up submitting Damon Ramos in 2 minutes. And from the first win, you're pretty high. Your second win, getting a submission at ADCC within 2 minutes, super duper high. And you run off into the crowd and you hug your coach and you hug your partner and your dad is there and you got fans watching and people coming up and kids are asking you for signatures and all that sort of stuff. If you don't remember that competing is a roller coaster of a day and you go with the highs and then don't remember that the lows are coming, you're going to crash pretty hard. And that's what ended up happening in day 2 when I narrowly missed out on beating Philippe. I crashed really hard after that match. And there were a couple of different strategies that I could have implemented that would have made my fourth match a lot better instead of getting submitted in like 2 minutes. Like the ebbs and flows of competing. Like I did the submitting in 2 minutes on my first day and then I got submitted in 2 minutes on my second day. It was fucking embarrassing. I hate that match, but it is what it is. But there were a couple of strategies that I could have used that I now implement with all of my students that you guys can benefit from that will prevent that from happening. And these ones are pretty tactical, so you'll enjoy these. The first thing that I would have amended coming from day 1 to day 2, and because this is a 2-day tournament, it's a huge drain on your energy mentally and physically. But the physical is the thing you have to make the most of, in my opinion, because it sets you up mentally as well. You've already been geared up for months and months and months, focused on this tournament and visualizing all of the ways that it could go right and all the ways that it could go wrong and really preparing yourself in your training process and all that sort of stuff. So the first thing that I would have done differently physically is implement a breathing process. You hear Hicks and Gracie talk about this all the time. He talks about the diaphragmatic, that's what he calls it, the diaphragmatic breathing versus the chest breathing. And it's really important between matches that you settle yourself back down and you avoid this roller coaster of a day, because if you just keep riding the highs, you're eventually going to crash. Your body has to come back to what's called a homeostatic level. So homeostasis is where you normally sit on a day-to-day basis. And when you have something that you experience that brings you up, your body is naturally going to bring you right back down. And it's also the same thing for saying that when you experience something that brings you to a low, your body's going to bring you back to homeostatic norm. So if you get too hot, for instance, your body's going to do its best to bring you back to baseline. If your body gets too cold, your body's going to do the best it can to get you back to baseline. And this happens when you get sick or any of that sort of stuff. It's the easiest way to explain it. What the breathing process does is assists your body in bringing you to these homeostatic norms where you're in what's called parasympathetic, not sympathetic. Sympathetic is the fight or flight system where your body's using a lot of resources trying to survive. Parasympathetic is like a rest and digest process where you're relaxed, your shoulders drop, you lose the tension, and you can just get into a bit more flow state. And so the breathing process that I would implement, that I would recommend, there's a couple of different ones, is the 4-4-4, where you inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and then you exhale for 4 seconds, then you start again. Or you can implement what's called 4-7-8 method, where you inhale for 4 seconds, exhale for 7 seconds, and then hold for 8 seconds. And you can look up a bunch of these different breathing processes and find which one works for you. Andrew Huberman has a double inhalation process where you breathe in like this, and then you top up, and then he uses what's called a physiological sigh. And according to him, if you've listened to his podcast, it's the fastest way to bring yourself into that parasympathetic state. So that might be a really good strategy if you have a tournament like an IBJJF tournament where you've only got 5 to 6 minutes in between your next match and your previous match, where you're still sweaty, you're still gassed up, you may have won in emphatic fashion, and you're dealing with the highs, or maybe you lost and you're going into the third medal match at another tournament, because IBJJF just do the double bronze medals, and you need to recenter yourself to focus on what you've got, on the task that you've got next, so that you can get back into that flow state and get out of that anxious feeling. The second most practical physical thing that we're going to look at is rehydration. Most people assume that rehydration is just talking about water. And when you sweat, you're losing electrolytes, you're losing salt, you're losing magnesium, potassium, zinc. You're losing all of these things that need to be replenished if your body's going to be working at optimal peak performance. And most people don't recognize, but water's just not going to cut it. You've got all these products like Element, you've got Sodi, all these different electrolyte brands that are really, really good. You want to try and find something that has a lot of salt in it, a decent amount of potassium, a decent amount of magnesium, and a decent amount of zinc. And just sip on that during the day. Don't try and overload yourself where you have 2 liters all at once. You end up feeling bloated and distended, and then you go into your next match a bit sluggish. But just have it on you during the day so that you're constantly replenishing those electrolytes that you're losing through the sweat of competing. The last one that we're going to talk about that's a physical process is honey. Now, you don't have to be like me where you're focused on natural products and raw honey and all that sort of stuff. You can use any sort of fast-acting glycogen, whether you want to use dextrose powder or lollies or chocolate or anything like that. Sometimes that can be a poorer strategy because it's going to spike your blood sugar way too much, whereas honey is not going to spike your blood sugar that much, but it's still going to give you the benefits of shuttling that glycogen back into your muscles so that you don't feel fatigued and sluggish and slow, and that you actually feel physically ready to go, which is going to increase your mentality because you're not worried about your shoulders being sore from a big wrestling match that you just completed, or you're not going to have your back or your glutes be sore from playing guard too much. You're just going to take it out of your mind and then put it over there because you've done the right things in terms of your physicality, which is going to make all the difference, especially when you're in a tournament setting that goes over multiple days, or it goes all the way from the morning to the evening. I know Grappling Industries starts 9 a.m. with the absolute division, and then your actual division might not be until 2 or 3 p.m. in the afternoon. That's a big gap, and if you don't fill it with these things, you might risk losing tournaments that you shouldn't lose, or losing matches that you shouldn't lose because you didn't focus in this area. So make sure that you're implementing these in your next tournament. The last problem that turns people into nervous wrecks and stops them from competing to the best of their ability is a fixation on winning and losing. I recently read a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, and it's by Timothy Galway, and it's a phenomenal, phenomenal book, and I definitely recommend you listen to it or you read it. I like to listen to mine when I'm driving, but he talks about this problem of fixating on winning and losing being the biggest hindrance to most people's competing at the best of their ability. Because when you're focused on an outcome, it goes back to, again, this thing of which we cannot control, which makes you rigid, it makes you stale, and it makes you hesitant, because you're either going to be doing things that avoid losses, which means you're going to be very tight and very fixated on not going into dangerous positions or not opening up for opportunities that may be there that you're scared that might go wrong so that you don't do them. Or you're only going to be focused on things that can force winning, which is kind of the same thing in different clothes. You're only going to be focused on getting a certain amount of points and then holding on to that lead. And if you've ever watched great comebacks from NFL or basketball or any of the major sports around the world, the teams that try and hang on to their lead are the ones that usually lose, because it's a mindset shift, right? They're so outcome focused. They're not process focused anymore. They've lost the focus on what generates winning in the first place, and it's playing the game really well. If you have a fixation on winning and losing, you're not focused on the things that generate winning and losing. You're focused on what the results of your actions are going to be, which means you're not present, you're not focused, you're not in the right mindset. And I had this with a student of mine recently, Joseph, who was competing a lot, winning a lot, but he would get to a position where he was up on points and he would just stall and hold, and he had the energy to be able to do things, and he knew that he should be pursuing finishes and pursuing submissions and doing all these things, but he just ended up putting himself into a position mentally where he decided, well, if I move, then I lose. And that becomes a very big hindrance mentally, because it's going to shut you down from chasing opportunities that could lead in better finishes by way of submission. Because to risk submitting, you have to risk being submitted. It's just the way that it goes. That's why jiu-jitsu is such an interesting concept. You have to put it all on the table and put it all on the line, because if you don't, well, then you're going to be very stale and very boring. And so to get him away from this fixation on winning and losing, and actually in the competition after all of these tips, he ended up submitting both of his opponents in about 2.5 minutes each of total mat time, where previously he was scoring 10 points on people and then riding out a match for 6 or 7 minutes, which is a massive change in his confidence, in his composure, in his skill set, and his approach to competing. Now he actually knows that when he goes into competition, he has the ability to submit people if his only focus isn't on winning and losing. So what did we change his focus to? We changed his focus to dealing with step number 3. The way that he decided to do this was having a nap. Essentially what he told me was to just calm himself down, make sure that he couldn't focus on anything else except sleeping, because he would go and look up his bracket and try and find out if the guys were younger than him or if they had more experience or anything like that. So he just completely negated that altogether by having a nap. And if you think that that's a viable strategy for you, I definitely recommend it. I don't personally like doing that. I like to be focused and I like to be on. I don't want to risk oversleeping and waking up real groggy or anything like that. But if you're a good napper during the day, absolutely start to implement a nap pre-competition. The second thing that we worked on was convincing himself his opponents were in the same boat as him. What does that mean? Everybody feels nervous on competition day. There is absolutely nothing you can do to evade it. Even Tom Aspinall recently was on a podcast saying, I feel extremely nervous when I'm about to compete, and I don't want to go out there and punch that guy in the face. But I know that somewhere sitting in this arena, there's another guy that has the exact same feelings as me that's going through the same thing. And that's the beauty of competition. It's high-level performers aren't the people that you think they are. They don't have this ability to just drown out nerves and just completely ignore them. They feel them, but they turn them into something that's useful for them, that becomes a type of energy that they can start to use and even put onto their opponent to make themselves compete at a higher level. And that's exactly what we did with Joseph, reminding him that his opponents are nervous as well. So it's not you that has the problem, it's a universal thing. And if it's universal, then they're going to be dealing with the same shit you're dealing with. So the person who can start to focus on what they can control as opposed to letting themselves get drifted away with anxiety, are the ones who are going to win. And so that becomes your secret weapon. The third thing that we focused on was offense over defense. Now, this one was specific to him, and it may be specific to your certain circumstance as well, because a lot of people think defense mind only is the way that you win. And you've heard all those sayings like the best offense is a good defense and so on and so forth. But in jiu-jitsu, like I was talking about beforehand, you got to take risks. You've got to put yourself out there. You've got to sometimes do things that might end up in a bad position, but at least you're going for something. And you're never going to know how it's going to end up until you take that risk. So you've just got to build your appetite for risk up, focus on being offensively minded first, and then dealing with the defense later. But it's only dealing with defense later that allows you to be offensively minded and give you the opportunity to actually submit and finish your opponents, just like Joseph did comparative to his other competitions where he was scoring points and not really doing anything after. The fourth thing that we focused on was a visual process. This is something I'm really big on with myself and my students, is visualizing what it's going to be like walking into the venue, what it's going to be like in how you start the match, what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like, trying to bring in as many sensory inputs as possible so you can familiarize yourself to what it's going to be like on the day. Because you don't want to get there having done none of this and be perplexed by the amount of people that are there, the noise that's there, the fact that your coach might be late and you're going to have to compete without them, or you left your pants at home or something like that. That can all be a massive disaster if you haven't done the visual process. And the way that this works is that I actually teach my guys to focus on the end. So what is it going to be like at the end of the day when you finish competing? How are you going to feel? What are you going to take from the day? What is the major lesson that you're going to have had? Or what is the overwhelming feeling that you're going to have? Is it going to be a feeling, like obviously you're not going to visualize a feeling of being disappointed or embarrassed or anything like that. You're going to visualize a feeling of being triumphant, overcoming, all of these sorts of positive characteristics. And notice how these aren't tied to winning and losing. You can feel triumphant in losing if you did your best. And that's another point that Timothy Galway talks about in The Inner Game of Tennis. Definitely recommend you buy the book and listen to it, because it's about how you feel in the process that's the most important. And it's the thing that's actually going to generate more wins more often, because if you feel better, you're going to compete better. And if you compete better, you're going to win more often. But it's not because you're focusing on winning. It's because you're focusing on the things that you can control, and that's building you into a better athlete. It's raising the level where you're actually competing at the same level as where you train 9 times out of 10, because you're not worried about outcomes and you're not worried about things you can't control in training. It's just a natural process. And so one thing that I'll add as well, as a bonus, this has been huge for me in my competition career. I used to think that competing was this big step above and this big level change and all these sorts of things. And if that's true mentally, you just go through the mental exercise yourself now, you're going to treat it as if it matters more. And if it matters more, then you've got to prepare more, you've got to do more, you've got to do all these things. And you're just piling pressure on yourself unnecessarily that's going to drive anxiety and worry. Whereas if you treat competition like training, it's just another day. You wake up the same, you eat the same, you prepare the same, you warm up the same, and that drives this key theme of familiarity. If you're familiar with this process, it's gonna be an easier adjustment for you to perform at your best, because it's what you do every single day. You're not raising yourself to some ridiculous level, you're just competing at the level that you already train at, which for most people is far above where they actually compete at if they don't do all of these things. So if you can do all these things and focus in the right areas, I guarantee that you compete the same way that you train, and that's going to be far above what you're currently competing at for most people. And if you want to really enhance the way that you compete by simplifying the sport of jiu-jitsu, removing all of the confusion and all of the mess and all of the noise, watch this video right here and I'll teach you exactly how to do that.